everyone. My name is Katy Widrick, and I'm the community manager for the Predictable Success Leadership Center. And I am so thrilled to have a friend, a colleague, and a boss of mine, Les McKeown, who is, of course, the founder of Predictable Success, joining me today. Hi, Les.
Hi, Katy. Hi, everybody.
I am truly thrilled to be talking to you because there is nobody who I find to be more compelling, more interesting, more energetic on the topic of leadership as you. And I think especially for this audience, you have such insights into what does leadership look like today, and how can somebody who is not yet maybe at the top level of an organization, is not yet the senior most executive, how can they pursue leadership in their everyday? So I am really excited to ask you a few questions that I have and that our community has had. So thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Great to be here, and thank you for those kind words.
Of course. So before we get into any of the nitty gritty, I would love for you to share what predictable success is. I know that you have really discovered and shared the predictable success leadership styles over your decades of working with leaders, but tell us what this really is.
Predictable success is essentially a model for organizational growth, which is based on my own experience. I was a serial entrepreneur when I was young, started about 42 new businesses. A couple of them were not-for-profits before I was 35. And, even a dumb Irishman, which is what I am, if you do something often enough, you begin to see recurring patterns. And I started to write those patterns down and very quickly got more interested in the patterns of successful growth than in the businesses themselves, which, maybe wasn't great for some of the businesses I was involved in. But I had the great privilege then of helping start what became one of the very first incubation centers in Europe. And this is a long time ago. I'm as old as dirt. And that grew to like 120 people we had in 13 locations worldwide. And I began to see patterns of not just startup growth, but second stage growth, third stage growth. And then I grew up in Ireland. I moved over here 1998, which is probably before the original birthday of some of our listeners. In order to prove that model out with very large organizations, which I had a magnificent opportunity to work with for the first decade of the century. So in all of that, I ended up just based on observation, seeing the consistent patterns of how organizations grow and why sometimes they don't. And within that model, and I'll finish this long ramble with this, one of the most crucial things I discovered pretty early on was when I started to work with leadership teams who wanted to get to the next stage in growth, they would typically start with, there's something wrong with our marketing plan. I think we got to rethink our strategic plan. I don't think we're hiring the right people, something like that, which I discovered 99.99 recurring was not the core issue. It was a symptom of a much larger issue, which was how the leadership team thought. And as I began to look at the patterns of how leaders think about growth, that's where the predictable success leadership styles come in.
And what's interesting to me, so I'm a processor. Anyone who's listening, VOPS, Visionary Operator Processor in Synergist. Selfishly and personally, when I first took the Predictable Success Styles quiz, I got these insights about me. It unlocked this deeper and more innate understanding that there are strengths that I feel like I was born with. There are strengths that I have learned on the job. And it also provided me an opportunity to see some of the challenges and weaknesses that I had felt over my career and understand that they were part of this larger principle. So with that, it's a loaded question, but do you find when you are working with people who are discovering their own leadership styles, in general, are people born into VOPS or into a particular leadership style? Have they developed those skills? What's your sense on somebody right now who might just be discovering what their style is?
It's a great question. And in order to frame the answer correctly, let me really quickly just give a very quick overview of what the four styles are. So we, as you said, VOPS, so we have the visionary style, which is essentially somebody who thinks in the big picture, 30,000 feet, likes to take risks, really only gets interested in something if it arouses their passions, if they can get really excited about it. Might be able to do the detailed, what I call dirty fingernail work, but not really their thing. Then we have the operators for whom the dirty fingernail work, that just getting stuff done is the be all and end all. That's what they want to do. They're not that comfortable with, blue sky thinking and, out of the box stuff, all that. They just want to be told this is what needs to be done. They'll go do it. They'll make it happen. It's typically not very pretty, but it'll be very effective. And they just work all day long. They're like Duracell bunnies. They just keep going. Then we have the processors like yourself, and I want to just qualify this in a moment or two, who are the folks who put systems around everything. They watch all of that and they say, well, why? That's fantastic. That's great. But why are we reinventing the wheel every time we do something? Why are we rethinking how we do stuff every time we have a new product launch or whatever? Processors want to codify stuff, put systems and processes together, have an audit trail, all that sort of stuff. And our fourth style is the Synergist style, and that's the style that knits those together, because the visionary operator processor are not really that harmonious. The visionary and the operator can work really, really well together, and they do. And typically they are the only ones that are around the early stages of any organization's growth. Excuse me. But when the processor gets introduced, which is an important thing to do at the right time, not a reflection on the processors, but at that point, we begin to have leadership conflict, because those three styles don't mix. And the Synergist style is the style that says, wait a minute, hold on. We can't afford to get into our corners here fighting for our visionary solutions or operator solutions or processor solutions. We need a synergistic solution that's the best for the organization as a whole. So with that in view, to answer your question, most of us have got a pretty baked in profile that's in the VOP, those three range, in those three styles. And just to clarify something that I said I would on the way through, we can a little simplistically put ourselves just in one bucket, but that typically is a little simplistic. We are typically a mix of at least two. So we typically have a primary style. I'm a primary visionary, and a secondary style. I'm a secondary processor. Some people have even got a third style, and some people are able to act on all four. So to complete the answer, the visionary operator processor styles are pretty baked in. It tends to be a sort of visceral response. It's who we are. You can change a little bit. You can move some of those around. You can move them around quite a lot if you take a disciplined, mentored, coaching, accountability approach, and you specifically want to be a better visionary. But you can't fundamentally shift those. People aren't going to turn overnight from being a visionary into an operator or a processor. They may have elements of those styles, but they're pretty much baked in. The Synergist style, it took me a long time, first of all, to recognize and identify and codify the existence of the Synergist style. And when I did see it and how vitally important it is, it then took me quite a while to realize the Synergist style is different from the visionary operator processor styles in that it is the one style that's learned. You learn how to be a synergist by finding yourself in groups and teams and thinking, oh, what can I do for us to make better decisions and make, grow our organization faster, more effectively, more efficiently. So the Synergist style can be moved up and down. The visionary operator processor can be moved a little bit, but not a lot.
That's so interesting. And I'm wondering, in all of your experience in working with leaders who are already established at upper level leadership, or those who are maybe just thinking about moving up, starting their own company, I know there are a myriad of different approaches to what success looks like. But when you see somebody who is maybe kind of experiencing dissonance, maybe they're trying to lead in a way that it does not fit their style, what happens when you see somebody understand, oh, I am a visionary, and so this helps me understand where I can grow and how I can lead well? What happens, I guess, when someone is experiencing dissonance and doesn't have that information, and when they unlock that by knowing what particular style they are?
Right. Well, first of all, it explains a lot. As to what they can do about it, it depends how much agency they have around the environment, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second or two. But one of the great pleasures I have in what I do is, we have what we call the Synergist Quiz. It actually it establishes your profile across all of the profiles. of the visionary operator processor synergist profiles. And, you know, we have hundreds of people take that just all the time. And one of the great pleasures I have is I get an email, you know, a couple of times every week from somebody saying, that just explains so much. Now I understand why, you know, I'm a visionary. I understand why I get irritated with this person, Joe. It's not because she's irritating me, which is what I thought. It's because she's a processor and I just don't have that mindset. And, you know, when she wants to take time to write stuff down and codify it, I now realize that's actually a good thing. So that's a great privilege of mine. The main way in which the dissonance becomes problematic is what we typically do, even if you never heard me talk about this stuff, never read any of my books, never took our quiz, most of us, using whatever our own vocabulary is, grow up with a reasonable amount of self-awareness about the type of thing that we want to do. You know, a visionary is typically not going to apply to become a CPA, you know, and you know, a processor is unlikely to start up a business as a graphic designer. There are exceptions to all of this, but by and large, we sort of self-regulate what we're doing. Where the main dissonance can happen, and this is a pretty crucial thing to see, is whenever, particularly if you are in a job, you're not the sort of founder of a business and you can change things any way you want, you go apply for a job. It's a great fit to your profile to begin with. So let's say you're a salesperson, you go, you know, you just want to be out on the road, excuse me, you just want to be closing those sales. You're a classic operator. You'll bang on doors all day long. You know, you'll take rejection, you just move on to the next one until you get the sale. And, you know, you're knocking it out of the park, you're doing really well. And then over time, you begin to struggle with the role. And you wonder, and your boss maybe wonders, what just happened here? You know, why is Jorge suddenly underperforming? And if you know the vocabulary, you can recognize that what's happening is your role has shifted. The demands that are being placed on you, let's say that, you know, you maybe because of the success you brought as a very successful salesperson, now they brought in Salesforce. You know, you got to do an awful lot of paperwork. You got to stop for a half an hour after every sales call and type stuff in. You got to remember customer codes. And that's not your thing. That's a processor thing. And, you know, it's not that you suddenly stop being bad at your job. It's just the role has drifted away from you. And if you see that, that can be very powerful, because then you got to either discipline yourself, learn by coaching, mentoring, training, to do the minimum amount of the P, the processor role, to start to perform again, or reset and go back, find another organization where you can go and just do pure operator stuff, or sit and talk to your manager about whether maybe somebody else can do that processor stuff for you, so that you can just concentrate on the stuff that you're really good at.
And I love, there's something you just said that really resonated with me, because I think whether it's a narrative I told myself or that I felt like, you know, business was telling me, you know, once I really understood that my processor gifts were in fact gifts and not always negatives, not always the negative, you know, person, hey, let's document, process, systematize. Once I understood how I could leverage them, I had a much deeper understanding of my opportunities in leadership. I think, honestly, Les, I don't know that I ever thought a processor like myself could be a founder or could be in senior leadership. And I know now that that's not the case. I know now that in leaning into what I've learned through predictable success really gives me that roadmap. But for somebody listening right now who thinks, oh my gosh, when Les talks about an operator, that's me, or when Les talks about a visionary, that's me, how do you see the roles of leadership? I don't know if it's big L leadership or little L, but in the pursuit of growth, if somebody wants to become on senior leadership or in the C-suite, are there opportunities for all of the styles, and how would you approach that in consulting with them?
Well, it's a great question. And I do want to emphasize the distinction that you just made. At senior leadership, if you're in the C-suite, whether that's just like 2 people or 200 people, the key thing to take away from the visionary operator processor synergist styles is that your style isn't the answer to every issue that the organization has. And that's tough for some leaders, particularly if they were founders, because the way organizations start is that the founder, who is almost always a visionary something, either a visionary operator, visionary processor, visionary synergist, but almost always a successful founder, strong visionaries, in the early days, their style is the one that has the right answer to almost everything that the organization needs, through a stage I call early struggle, and into the second stage, highly technical name I call it fun. What's sometimes called the golden gut, the founder's ability to make intuitive decisions, is absolutely the driving force for growth, and it shouldn't be any other way. But very quickly in any successful organization, complexity grows to the point where that ceases to be the case. So I'd say, if you're listening to this and you're in the C-suite, the key thing to bear in mind is it the case? And if your business is alive and growing, has been doing so for more than 3 years, it's probably is the case. Your one way of thinking is going to be a barrier to your next stage of growth. You've got to expand beyond if you're visionary, just visionary thinking, operator thinking, processor thinking, synergist thinking. You've got to come up with the ability to get the best balanced decision for the organization as a whole. Now, if you're if you're in the front line, you're a frontline employee, individual contributor, whatever you want to call it, one of the things that I talk about a lot in Do Lead, in fact, the whole book is premised on the importance of realizing that leadership is not an elite act. It's not something that only people who have got the title of leaders can or should do. Of course, they have to. That's their job. It's in their title. They got to go lead all the time. But I define leadership as any act that helps a group of 2 or more people get closer to their common goals. So if you're there in your business, your not-for-profit, your church, your charity, wherever you're working, and you don't have a title of leader, and you see something, or you're given something that you can do that gets your team, group, division, entire organization closer to its common goals, you can perform what I call a not so random act of leadership. Acts of leadership happen all the time and should happen throughout the whole organization. Now, it might be somebody just, bringing their car in someday that they don't normally do because we've all got to go to a client meeting. I provide my car. That sounds like the most mundane, boring thing. That's a not so random act of leadership, because you're doing something that will help a group of 2 or more people get closer to their common goals. I give an example in the book of something that stuck with me when I was writing it. I wrote most of the book in my local Starbucks, and just watching one guy who had no interest in becoming a store manager, let alone the CEO of Starbucks, no interest in doing that. He performed not so random acts of leadership all the time, simply by seeing what needed to happen to make the customers have a better experience, and more importantly, in a sense, his team have a better experience. So, he would jump out from having busted tables to jump behind the register if a line had grown up. If there wasn't a line there, he'd go back and bust a lot of tables very quickly. And he didn't want to be a leader with a title, but he was performing not so random acts of leadership all the time. So what I would say is, recognize that you can lead from anywhere if you wish to. There's just 2 criteria that's really important. One is, you can't go around just doing anything. That's why I say not so random. It's got to be something that's leading your team or your division or your department or your organization closer to its common goals. Those are the guidelines. That's the railroad tracks that will keep you on track. And the second thing is just to go back to our original discussion and recognize that you can't act just out of your own style and nothing else. You've got to recognize what's the impact that I'm going to have in the wider team. So sometimes a processor solution and a processor act, you're a processor, you're typically going to, it's sort of like, if you're not careful, you can bring just that one tool to every problem. And sometimes that one tool isn't actually the right solution for there. So just be aware of that. Make sure that you're not just using your style like a drumbeat. This is the only answer that we have. I've made a spreadsheet that's going to solve everything. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't.
And I'll piggyback on that because it's something that you do discuss and do lead, and something, I think you really just alluded to there is that even in the example that you gave of the Starbucks worker, you didn't say he had to ask for permission. You didn't say that he had to wait to be assigned that. In fact, if I'm reading, between the lines, you're saying that really finding those opportunities where you're not going to upset the apple cart, you're not going to create problems or have to ask for forgiveness, but finding those in between spaces. Is that fair to say that leadership doesn't always require you to wait for somebody to tell you to do it?
Right, as long as it's within those guardrails as I discussed. If this is something that's going to get your folks to closer to their common goals, and it's not illegal or unethical, then sure. Now, that's not to say there isn't a place from anywhere in the organization having a highly innovative thought that's not within my business's standard operating practice, and thinking, I should really run that past my manager. That's there's a lot of room for doing that. What I'm talking about is really bringing your discretionary effort. We all turn up every day. It doesn't matter where you are, what you are, whether you're a founder or not. I do it. I'm a one-man band, well, one man and a dog. And I've worked in very large organizations. It doesn't matter where you are in the organization. We all turn up every day with the ability to deliver some discretionary effort, a lot of discretionary effort, or no discretionary effort. One of the things that impacts that is just how we're feeling. You're just still recovering from COVID. You may not be in a state of mind to bring a lot of discretionary effort. What I'm saying is, if what you want to do is to develop as a leader, you've got to show up with your discretionary effort, your antenna there, and look for how can I help my team get closer to their common goals. And I'll give a very mundane example in the book, and I won't paint the whole picture. I'll just give a highlight of it. I was at one point, back in the day when I was running the incubation business, so I had a partner, co-founder at the time. His name was Will. And Will and I were trying to find somebody who could run a new office that we just set up in San Francisco. And we were looking for someone with a very particular mindset. They were going to have to work on their own because we couldn't afford to be there all the time. And we had to trust them to look after the small details. And we interviewed, we set a week aside, and we were interviewing person after person after person. We couldn't get the right person. And our then shared EA, or executive assistant, was the one that was coming in between every interview, taking the notes away from the previous one, resetting our coffee cups, making the place look well, helping us out if we needed anything very quickly, telling us what our messages were that came in. And we were on day 5 of this week of interviewing when Will looked at me and said, "We have the candidate right here. She's been coming in and out of here like 7 times every day, and she got the job and went on to run and grow and develop." This was our executive assistant. She ended up going out to San Francisco, stayed there for many, many years, and grew our business out there. And that was because she was committing not so random acts of leadership. You may not view those as acts of leadership, but that's precisely what they are.
I love that. And I've heard the phrase dress for the job you want. Really what you're saying is operate inside of the structure, but perform these random acts of leadership, or not so random acts of leadership, and really kind of grow into the role that you are, maybe destined to have, or you can work to have.
100%. And I'll tell you where this was, where I first became really aware of this. And it was before I had codified the leadership styles. But just to contradict something I said earlier about visionaries not becoming CPAs, I actually did qualify as a British equivalent of a CPA, a chartered accountant, and I worked in the London office of Price Waterhouse. And this was so long ago that anybody who knows the industry, they would know that company as Price Waterhouse Coopers now, because it merged with another very large company. But this is so long ago, it was before that merger. So it was just Price Waterhouse. And I was very ambitious back then in my 20s, and I wanted to be a partner in Price Waterhouse. And I got the opportunity to go to lunch with one of the senior partners who was sort of mentoring me. I was on a fast tracking thing. And I asked him outright, "What do you do in Price Waterhouse to become a partner?" I was about 6 layers down from there at that point. And I can still picture him literally with his fork halfway up, and he paused and he said, Les, something you need to understand. We don't make people partners in Pricewaterhouse. We recognize people who are acting as partners. And that just said it all for me, and has defined a lot of my thinking about what true leadership is ever since.
That gave me chills. And I imagine that that will resonate with many of the listeners here who are pursuing leadership. And I imagine just have the highest integrity. You know, many of us are just trying to show up, do good work, and trust that that work will be recognized on its own. So I think hearing that experience from you will really, really help people. I'm also so glad that we were able to talk just a little bit about Do Lead, because I begged you. This book made such an impact on me, and I know that it is so incredibly important for the pursuit of leadership for our Predictable Success Leadership Center members. So I begged you to make a special offer, which you have graciously allowed. We are going to offer a free copy of Do Lead, Les's book, a free copy of Do Lead as long as our supplies last. Les is holding it right there. And if you're interested to take advantage of this, you simply need to go to my.predictablesuccess.com/Do Lead book. We'll also provide all of the links. And by the way, if you don't yet know your particular leadership style, what Les and I have been talking about, you will be able to take that free quiz, learn all about your style, and immediately apply it to what you read in the book. So I'm so thrilled that we're able to do that for our community. And I'm so appreciative, Les, of you allowing us to do that, and also for having this discussion on leadership today. Thank you so much for your time. It is always such a pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Katie. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.